So we moved our greet function into a separate file, and now we can reuse this file in other projects. Now, by the same token, we can also reuse code written by other people in our projects as well. But there is a problem here. What if someone else also has written a greet function? Then our greet function and theirs are going to conflict. This is where we use namespaces. A namespace is like a bucket that we put our functions inside, and with this we can prevent name conflicts. You have already seen namespaces before, so we have the std namespace for all the functions and classes defined in the standard template library. So in the standard library, we have a string class. Now, if tomorrow we decide to create our own string class that's going to be different, our string class is not going to conflict with the one defined in the standard library because this one is prefixed with std, so it's inside a separate bucket. Okay. Now let's see how we can put the greet function into a namespace to prevent future name conflicts. It's super easy. So first we type the namespace keyword followed by a space, and then give our namespace a name. We could call this anything. I'm going to call it messaging. So I'm assuming in this namespace, we're going to have a bunch of functions for displaying messages. Okay. Now let's move our function declaration right here and add a bit of indentation to make our code more readable. Good. Now we have to repeat the same step in our implementation file. So we go to greet.cpp and put this function definition inside a namespace. So namespace messaging, make sure to type the exact same name. Then we move the function definition right here, add indentation, good. Now back to our main file. Look, we have a compilation error because the compiler cannot find the greet function. Now here we have a couple of options. One option is to prefix the function with its namespace. So we type messaging followed by double colons. Good. In fact, if we type messaging and double colons, we can see all the functions defined in this namespace. It's very handy, okay? Now, the other option is to import the messaging namespace on the top exactly the same way we imported the std namespace. Why do we do this? Well, if we have several calls to the greet function, then our code looks a little bit repetitive. So every time we call the greet function, we also have to type messaging followed by double colons. So if we use the messaging namespace, then we can simplify our code and remove all these repetitions like this. Okay. Now there is a hidden problem with this approach. If we include multiple namespaces on the top, again, we might run into name conflicts. What if we have a greet function defined in this namespace? Then our greet functions defined in these two namespaces are going to conflict. So in such cases, instead of bringing the entire namespace, we can bring in specific functions in that namespace. So we type using messaging double colons greet. We're only importing this function from this namespace. Similarly, instead of using the entire std namespace, we can use specific functions we need in this file. Let's say in this file, we need the cout function, or more accurately, the cout object. We can only use this particular object. Now, similarly, if in this file, we also need to use cin, here we can type another using directive, std cin, or we could put these together and combine them using a comma. That also works. It's a matter of styling. Now, as you can see, with this approach, our code gets a little bit more verbose because we have to be very specific about the functions and objects we're using in this file. So here's what I want you to take away. For the most part, you can use an entire namespace. So here we can say using namespace std instead of using these specific objects. But if you run into conflicts, then you can use the second approach to use specific functions or objects in a namespace.